Welcome back to the A&P2 lab, everybody. It's Mr. Hopper. We're going to be looking at some blood vessels and other accompanying materials today, if at all possible. So I have uploaded for you a nice pair of PDFs that are set up for anatomy and physiology. You'll find that the lymphatic PDF is quite thin, whereas the vessel-based PDF is quite substantial. And if you look at the back of this, there is a quite substantial list of arteries and veins that are important, we'll say, as well as a whole variety of other materials that are worthy of your knowledge. Well, we're going to go through and talk about some of this today and see where it takes us, and I'm going to do my absolute best to show you how best to study this material, and also we're going to clarify things just a little bit and try to focus on specific items. Learning every artery and vein in the body would be fantastic. But with our situation, especially this summer, the speed at which we're working, I think it would be more conducive to limit the number of arteries that are being utilized, arteries and veins. So we're going to do that. I have for you, and I will be uploading in mere moments, whenever you're seeing this, a nice list of the major arteries and veins that I want you to be concerned with. And you'll notice that my list of veins is somewhat limited by comparison to my list of arteries. That is because a lot of the arteries and veins share the same name. All right, they share the same name. And because of that, I'm simply not repeating myself. Like if you know one of the veins, you might know one of the arteries. They share some similar naming mechanisms. So how would I study for this if I were you? Well, as we continue, I'm going to run you through these models, okay, and some of those on the wall over there as well, and sort of walk you through what does what and where these go and what they're for. And also, I'm going to walk you through some very nice images that I've got and see if that can't help also. Okay, your textbook has some wonderful breakdowns of all of these names and where they go and what they do. Your textbook has beautiful images of all of this material, but I've got this lab manual that I've used in the past, and I tend to find that it is at least marginally superior in most ways for a lab-like situation. So I'm going to run you through the stuff that I think is important. I went through and built this list, and I went through and highlighted here so I could kind of walk you through and explain what does what as we go. So that's going to be the goal. I'm going to walk you through some images. I'm going to show you on the models, and we're going to see how this goes, hopefully well. So with that in mind, let's get started. All right, first things first, let's go through some general name mechanisms. So here I've got pulmonary trunk. If it says pulmonary, you got to know it deals with lungs. Here we've got one that says aorta. Let's see, there's some more in here someplace. Let's see, there's another aorta. There's another aorta. This should tell you something, all right? So for instance, the aortic arch is in fact an arch that comes up off of the aorta, and you can see that quite clearly here, a nice arch up and off the aorta. So you can see that aorta and use it as a starting point, and what you do to learn arteries and veins is you follow it down and then you count branches as you go. All right, so for instance, I've got my aortic arch here. It's going to go down what's called a thoracic aorta. It's going to be behind the heart, okay? Descending aorta, also thoracic aorta. This depends on kind of what text you're looking at. It's not even labeled here, but that's what it is. It's the descending thoracic aorta, and that's going to become, as you go down, the descending abdominal aorta there, okay, descending abdominal aorta, and you'll be able to follow this all the way down because the aorta goes in behind the heart and then travels down the spinal cord. All right, so there's your heart, here are your lungs. Before I really go any further, I should probably clarify something else with you before we even proceed. Understanding systemic versus pulmonary circuit is going to be very important for your exam. So obviously the systemic circuit fed by the left side of the heart is going to be moving blood all around the body, and that's going to start with that aorta. Whereas the pulmonary circuit is going to involve the arteries leading away from the heart carrying deoxygenated blood to the lungs, and then veins coming back to the heart carrying oxygenated blood that can then be pumped out to the body. So when you look at this, I don't really care for the way this is done. I think that a better way to do this is using an image like this. This, again, you lose a lot when you see an image like this. You need to think about the right side of the heart pumping blood up through this pulmonary trunk, out the pulmonary arteries, into the lungs to pick up oxygen, and then coming back in via these pulmonary veins. Okay, remember, this is a really weird system. In this case, the pulmonary arteries are carrying deoxygenated blood to the lungs. Pulmonary veins are carrying oxygenated blood back to the heart. Normally, when we think about arteries and veins, we think about the arteries as carrying high-pressure oxygenated blood, and then the veins carrying deoxygenated blood. But in the pulmonary circuit, that is backwards. And that's the reason that they are including this blue pulmonary trunk here in this image of arteries, because that is an artery right there. All right, shouldn't have done that in red, but that is a pulmonary artery. Excuse my terrible handwriting. All right, so we have the heart, we have these pulmonary arteries leading out of this pulmonary trunk going out to the lungs, and then that will come back via pulmonary veins, as you can see there. All right, moving on. So let's see, where did I leave off? We've got our descending thoracic aorta. That's going to be back behind the heart. So that is coming out of here and going down through the thoracic cavity. Remember, your diaphragm is coming right through here. And so behind there is aorta dipping down behind the heart. That is thoracic aorta, or what I've always heard called the descending thoracic aorta. And then you have a descending abdominal aorta. Get my point. The reason they say that is because this upper part here is considered the ascending aorta, whereas that would be considered the descending aorta. But I am simply going to call this the aortic arch, and that's going to be the thoracic or descending thoracic aorta. All right, that'll do. So we've got our descending thoracic aorta, brachiocephalic artery. All right, this is important because this is one of those that comes right out of the heart. Brachiocephalic. I want you to know what this means, right? Anything brachio means arm, and anything cephaly means head. So the brachiocephalic goes both to the arm and to the head. And if you find this thing here and follow it over, what you're going to see is that it's going to come up out of the heart. Okay, and there's the brachiocephalic trunk, and then it will split off into a subclavian here. Can you guys see this? I hope you can. It'll split off into a subclavian here and a common carotid there. So it's a brachiocephalic. It goes both to the head and to the arm. Okay, your brachial region is like where your bicep is, right there. So your bicep muscle itself is called the biceps brachii because it's in the brachial region of the arm. So again, where does this brachiocephalic go? It goes both to the arm and to the head. You can see that quite clearly here. All right, so we're coming up, actually let's go from here. We're going to come up out of the heart. The first one, numero uno, that's the brachiocephalic. And that brachiocephalic is going to come up and branch, part going up to the head via a carotid artery, and then part going out to the arm via this subclavian inside of there, subclavian artery. All right, perfect. Let's see, what do we have next? So that's brachiocephalic. We got left and right common carotid arteries. Those are pretty obvious. So here's a carotid, and there's a carotid right there in the neck, going up the neck. These are arteries carrying extremely high pressure blood. And this common carotid is important because it is the second artery coming up off of the aortic arch. So 1, 2. The second one is going straight up the neck, right there, straight up the neck, to become a common carotid artery. All right, so we've got our common carotids, one coming off of this brachiocephalic, and then one coming straight up off the heart itself. And let's see, common carotids. Then we have our left and right subclavian arteries. Again, subclavian, that would be below the clavicle. You got to think about what part of the body we're dealing with here. Okay, we're in the shoulders. Subclavians are shoulder-based arteries. And what you do here is, you can see brachiocephalic branching into a subclavian, and then coming up off the aortic arch here, what we have is a nice subclavian artery, and that is number 3. Okay, Number 3, coming off the aortic arch, that's going to go straight out the arm. Coming up off the aortic arch and going straight out the arm, that is going to be a left subclavian artery. All right, so those are the subclavians. We have an abdominal aorta. The abdominal aorta is going to be below the diaphragm. So we have our diaphragm here, and then below the diaphragm is this abdominal aorta. And the abdominal aorta will branch numerous times. So let's look at that here in our friend. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the lungs away. All right, opening up where the lungs are found. That gives us a heart. You can see the heart quite clearly, all the branching inside of here for the pulmonary circuit. I'm going to take the heart out. You can see the superior and inferior vena cava. We'll get back to those in a second. You can see the branches coming off of the pulmonary trunk there, going out as pulmonary arteries. And I'm going to drop it. And there's the aortic arch, right there. So that's the aortic arch. And when I come up the aortic arch, that's going to dip back down and go down as the thoracic or descending thoracic aorta. Then I can take my liver off of there. It's got the, inferior vena cava there. I can take the stomach off of there, which has mesenteric arteries, gastric arteries, which we'll talk about in a little while. And I can take the intestines off of there and set that to the side. And we end up with a situation like this. All right, a situation like this. Boy, I need more lighting in here. All right, let's see if I can find something. All right, we have come over to the window so I can have a little bit more light so you can actually see inside of here. I think that might help a little bit. But you can see the thoracic aorta coming down and becoming the abdominal aorta, okay? Now, in this abdominal aorta, you can see the branches that are coming off of this thing in periodic locations. This is a very special set of branches. There's 3 of these, and they are called the celiac trunk. All right, celiac trunk right there. The celiac trunk is important because it branches off to sort of feed some of the major organs of your abdominal cavity. For instance, coming off the first big branch of this is going to come up to the liver. All right, so the liver is going to have a branch coming off right to the left-hand side. My left, going left this way. We're not doing anatomical position apparently. But that's going to be the hepatic branch, all right? A hepatic artery is going to come out. Anything hepatic means liver, so you know that's liver-based. And then this big branch here is going to dip down and come right, and that's going to feed this organ here. That is your spleen, all right? So it's going to be a splenic artery. Yeah, there it is, splenic artery, right there. So you got your celiac trunk, a hepatic, and a splenic. And again, there's 3 of these. You can see them quite clear, and I'll show you in the book here in a little while. The third one is actually gastric. That would be going to help out the stomach. All right. Next, as we go down, we run into the next big branch here. And this branch is important because it's going to come down and feed the intestinal tract. So this one here, again, go over to our list, is the superior mesenteric artery. The mesentery is kind of neat. Let me go over here and show you on another model. Here we go. So the mesentery is going to be inside of your intestines. So if you grab the intestines and kind of pull them up, there's a fibrous membrane in there, and it will contain lots and lots of blood vessels. That's the mesentery, and it provides the nutrient supply, the arterial pressure, if you will, that allows for your, whatever you call it, digestive process to occur. Okay, so that's going to be mesenteric, the mesenteric artery, big artery coming right off of the aorta, coming out and feeding the intestinal tract. All right, that's not quite right. Let's put the bladder back the way it goes. At least I'd like to. There we go. Bladder back the way it goes. Now where are we at? Superior mesenteric, common iliacs, internal and external iliacs, and femoral arteries. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to come down here to this first branch. Okay, and on that first branch, what we're going to do is we're going to come up out and have common iliacs, first branch of common iliacs. And then what I want you to notice is inside of there, I hope you can see this. I'll try to get my camera turned on where I can see what I'm looking at. What I want you to notice is this is branching out and in, okay? Out and in, quite clearly, out and then going in by comparison. What these are, so common iliac, these are going to be the external iliac and internal iliac. external iliac, and then internal iliac. So you're in the pelvis. Parts going into the pelvis, that's internal iliac, and then parts going out to feed the legs, those are going to be the external iliacs. All right. So the external iliacs are going to travel down, and then there's going to be another set of branches right there at the border of the pelvis. And the one that's going to come down the leg, which is hard to see here, let's find a better one. All right, let's try this. So what we have here is we're going to be coming down the descending abdominal aorta, going to branch into common iliacs, and then that'll branch into internal and external iliacs. Internal going in, external coming out. That will further come down and branch again right at the pelvis. And we're not going to worry about most of this except for the big femoral vein. Big femoral artery. Okay, the femoral artery is very important. It's one of these that most people know something about, so there it is. Big femoral artery. Yeah, all right, good, that'll do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Follow the branches. Descending abdominal aorta, common iliacs, internal iliac, external iliac, branch, femoral. All right, now let's make dadgum sure we're certain about this. Why are we calling these iliacs? Well, here we are in the Anatomy 1 lab. That would be because this is your iliac crest. All right, there it is, iliac crest. So these arteries are coming down by these bones and then branching in, going into the opening here in the pelvis, and then coming down the leg further, making this a femoral artery. Okay, again, why would we call it the femoral artery? Because it runs past the femur. It's a very simple process and something worthy of your time. All right, here we are back at the table, and I just want to make sure that we are all clear on this material. So what we have is, let's just start at the heart and work our way away. We have the aortic arch, which I expect you to know the aortic arch. The aortic arch coming off of this is first this brachiocephalic trunk, which further branches into a carotid and a subclavian. Next, off of the aortic arch, coming up the neck, is going to be a common carotid. And then next off of the aortic arch is going to be this left subclavian artery coming out the arm. Okay, that is going to be going down the thoracic cavity, so it's the descending abdominal aorta. No, descending thoracic aorta. And then once you pass the diaphragm, this becomes the descending abdominal aorta. Okay, thoracic here, abdominal here. Depends on where it is based off the diaphragm. Once the abdominal aorta gets down here, it's going to branch multiple times. You'll have a branch coming off here, going out to the liver. That would be the common hepatic. Again, this is the celiac trunk, this group of branches. Going off to the liver, that would be the common hepatic, and then coming the other way out to the spleen, which would be in this area, which would be considered the splenic artery. So then we have our descending abdominal aorta traveling down, and then we have renals. Did I make you know renals? There's got to be renal on here, right? Well, let's just write that in someplace. Renal artery. There we go. You got to know the renals. These are going to be going out to the kidneys. Anything kidney is renal. Okay, renal is kidney, kidney is renal. Just like anything hepatic is liver, liver is hepatic. Okay, you need to know that because when we do the urinary system, you're going to have a very good grasp of the arterial networks inside the kidney. It is so amazing and beautiful. You need to know it. So let's go ahead and add in those, renal arteries. Here, let's go ahead and underline that. So we got our renal arteries, and then right in the middle is this superior mesenteric. That superior mesenteric is going to go out to the mesentery of the intestinal tract, feed that mesentery, provide the blood pressure necessary for the exchange of nutrients in the intestinal tract, the absorption therein which takes place. All right, we're going to go down the abdominal aorta and branch these branches here. So we're going to have common iliacs, branches into internal iliac and external iliac. So you can see it clearly right here. There is the internal iliac, and that's the external iliac. And then as we go down the leg, once we get out of the pelvis, we're going to call that the femoral artery. What we're really doing is we're doing it based off of where the branches are. But for my purposes, to make this straightforward, femoral is going to be down here by the femur once we get out of the pelvis. and that would be your arteries. I went ahead and labeled up this image as well, just so I could show you sort of what's going on here. You can see this celiac trunk coming down. You can see this branch going out to the liver, which would be common hepatic. You can see this branch coming down and over to the spleen, which would be splenic. You can come down to this big mesenteric over here between where the kidneys would be, and that mesenteric would be coming out and feeding, if you look at this, would be coming out and feeding all of these intestines, So we've got this superior mesenteric artery coming out and feeding all those. And then we can go down further to our common iliacs, internal and external iliacs. That's a decent picture too. Not bad. Worth your time. All right. Next, let's do these veins. I went through and went ahead and labeled all these out so you can see them quite clearly. And I'm going to run you through them top to bottom just sort of as we go. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be dealing first with our superior and inferior vena cava. These are obviously draining into the heart. Remember, these are veins. They're coming back to the heart. We have our jugulars, external and internal jugulars. They sound exactly like what they are. You have two of these per side, so an external and an internal per side, draining the sides of the head. A big brachiocephalic vein set, subclavian veins, renal veins, common iliacs, and femoral veins. So let's see how these line up. So what I have here is the neck, and on that neck there will be an internal and an external jugular. The picture here is not ideal. So what I've done is I found a better image for you. What you can see is two on either side. You've got an external and an internal, with the internal being a little larger. And we can even come over here to our models and we can see these. So they have not given you all the branches you need, but what we've got is an external jugular and an internal jugular moving up from there. So internal, external. Okay, moving down, we've got our subclavians. Again, these are going to be in the shoulders. Or in this case, a right subclavian and a left subclavian as they move through. And then what we will have are these two brachiocephalics. The brachiocephalics are important. Again, think about this. Brachiocephalic, that means arm and head. The brachiocephalics are where we have a subclavian come in and a jugular come down. We're going to branch into a single unit. That makes this a subclavian. No, improper. That makes this a brachiocephalic, and that makes this brachiocephalic. All right, so that's what we're dealing with. This brachiocephalics. The two brachiocephalics are going to come together to form up the superior vena cava, and that's obviously going to lead right back into the heart. All right, so here we are. We have our pulmonary trunk yet again shown here. You can see your aorta popping up out of the heart there. Again, all around the heart, and then coming back up to the heart, coming back up to the right atrium. Just like you have a superior vena cava, you have this inferior vena cava. All right, inferior vena cava, we're going to follow that down. You got renals going out to the kidneys, just like you do with the arteries. Follow that down to our branches. At our branches here we have left and right common iliacs. Follow that down. You have external and internal iliacs, just like you do. Oh, there we go. Just like you do with the arterial network. And then as we go down, we have our femoral vein there. Now the veins are a little more branching. So imagine that you've got a big artery going down the leg, using gravity to pull all that blood down. Coming back up is a little more complicated. So what we have is a lot more veins, okay? A lot more big veins. I'm not going to ask you to know all those, like the saphenous coming down and feeding the foot, or dragging from the foot, for example, is kind of interesting. But for my purposes, all I'm going to ask you to know is the femoral for time being. And let's go see if we can find some of these elsewhere. Okay, all right, being that these are veins, we're going to start at the bottom and work our way back to the heart, all right? So we're going to have our femoral down here. The femoral is going to come up into the abdominal area, we'll say. So this is going to be an external iliac vein and an internal iliac vein. That will come up to the common iliacs, and then this, leading up, is the inferior vena cava. You can quite clearly see your renals there, and then that will come up and terminate into the heart. And again, we can come down. We've got a external jugular here. We've got our subclavian over here, which makes this brachiocephalic. Brachiocephalic dumping into the superior vena cava, and then back down into the heart. And remember, you have an external and an internal jugular on both sides. Worthy of your knowledge. All right. Also on this blood vessel lab, we have this breakdown of an artery and a vein, and that's worthy of your time here. So tunica interna, tunica media, tunica externa, or tunica adventitia, and just generally knowing which one's an artery and which one's a vein. You know, that's all well and good. I think it's probably better to show you the real thing, though. All right, folks, this is not the greatest microscopy I've ever done. We're going to take a stab at it. What you can see there, that is an artery, smaller, round and muscular. And below that, that is a vein, right? Bigger, more flat. Now I could come in here, I hope, and zoom this in. Oh, I went the wrong way. Well, that would explain something. Okay, and zoom this in a little bit, and what you can see is that artery. So the tunica intima would be that inner lining. The tunica media is made out of smooth muscle, and you should be able to tell that smooth muscle at this stage. Let's see if we can get this thing to look decent. There's the artery, there's that smooth muscle, all right? So the tunica media, and then the tunica adventitia would be fibrous connective tissue along the outside. So there's a nice artery, small size, and there's a vein. It's huge by comparison. Look at the size of that vein. And imagine this thing full of blood, right? Very large indeed compared to that artery. Whew. Well, there's an artery and a vein for you. Tunica media, tunica, or let's do it in order. Tunica interna, that would be the, or intima, that would be the inner lining, the mucosa. Tunica media, which is made out of muscle, smooth muscle. And then the tunica adventitia, tunica externa, which would obviously be the connective tissue around the outside. One more thing that we need to do, and that is learn how to take blood pressure. And the unfortunate thing is, it's like 6 o'clock in the afternoon, so there's no one here. This place is a ghost town for me to take blood pressure on. So I'm going to do my best to take blood pressure on myself. I have here my stethoscope, my personal stethoscope. I have here a nice sphygmomanometer. It is called a sphygmomanometer. That is a blood pressure cuff. And I'm going to make sure that my camera's set right. And it wasn't set right. So it was probably really shaky footage. But right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to take blood pressure. Now, you're not really supposed to take blood pressure on yourself for numerous reasons, but I am going to because I have no alternative. So, without further ado, what I'm going to do, I would love to not have a shirt on right now, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take this blood pressure cuff, and I'm going to slap it on myself as best as I physically can, and I'm here to tell you it is not an easy task. All right, now, what I've got is, let's see if we can do this. I have this pressure gauge, and I have a bulb with which I can pump, okay? On this bulb is a little petcock, so I can pump this up, and now listen. All right, so the petcock allows me to regulate the air pressure. And what you'll see amateur nurses do is they'll take this and clamp it shut, and then when they're trying to do blood pressure and they get ready to let the pressure off, they can't get it loose. So they break it too fast and the pressure drops and it doesn't work very well. So we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to turn this thing until it stops. It's now tight, and then I'm going to break it loose. Just have it barely tight, just barely finger tight. Now, I'm going to pump up my sphygmomanometer here, my blood pressure cuff, and at the same time, I'm going to listen to arterial flow down through my arm. And what I'm going to do with the cuff is, I'm going to cut off the blood flow to my arm. All right, that's what happens. I'm trying to cut off the amount, or I'm trying to cut off the blood flow to my arm. The idea is that once I no longer hear blood rushing past my arterial network in my arm, I know that I have breached the maximum amount of pressure that my heart is currently pumping out. And we're gonna hope that's somewhere between 120 and 140. Okay, cool. I'd love for it to be low. Right now, who knows? But the idea, again, is that I'm going to cut off the blood flow to my arm. And at the very moment that I no longer hear anything through my stethoscope, I know that that's the pressure, that's the max pressure that my heart is getting during systole, during systolic pressure. I have established the top number, the systolic pressure. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start letting off the air. And as the needle falls, you'll see it jumping with my heartbeat. So my heart's putting pressure through the cuff. Actually, you can see that quite clearly here. Let's see if we can do this. Hang tight. Oh my gosh, one-armed is impossible. Hang on. And let's try this. I hope you can see this. I can squeeze the cuff. You can see that thing moving around. You'll see it going bump, 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 bump with my heartbeat as this is happening. All right. So once you're going to see it tick, 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 and then stop ticking and then go down. When I'm listening with the stethoscope and I'm watching the bumps, when I stop hearing the slushing sound of blood, that's a good way of knowing that I found my bottom or diastolic number. The amount of pressure remaining in the arterial network after ventricular contraction. There we go. So when I stop hearing that swishing sound of blood rushing past the cuff, when blood starts flowing normally, I know I've got my bottom number. And you'll see the tick here too. When you stop seeing the ticks, you kind of know. So, let's give this a try. All right. So, you must be careful. This can be very dangerously loud. Quick comment, when you're doing blood pressure, don't put your thumb against the stethoscope, because you can actually hear your own blood pressure through the opposing side of the scope, so you keep it away from the diaphragms. Again, don't try this at home. So I've got it up around 100, 115, 120, and I'm listening to my heartbeat. About 120. It's hard to do. This is very difficult to do, but I'm going to throw it somewhere around 120/90. It's very hard to do this one-handed. And I would like to now do the exact same thing. Let's call it 120/80, just so we can feel better about ourselves. I want you to see the blood pressure cuff. I want you to see what's happening while this is going on. I would like for you to see on the cuff that you can see those pressure waves. as they're running through. All right, let's try it. I'm just going to let you look at it just like this. I wish that you could hear, but again, this is not the ideal situation. Bumping it up. Now, see the bumps? Bump, bump, bump. You can see the bumps. There, ooh, see it going? It's really going there. So you know you're getting into the numbers. Dropping, dropping, dropping. Look at it. See the tick? Tick. Ticking. Barely ticking. No ticking. So just giving you an idea of kind of how this works. It's not an ideal way of doing things. I would love for this to be a better learning situation, but unfortunately this late in the day, it's just not the way that it works. So let's call it there. Let's claim a blood pressure of 120/80, and we can use that to then fill in PDFs and things. All right, thanks.